Predict, pick, and prevail in your fantasy football leagues with Nick Giacobbe and Nick Cap. From breakouts to busts, superstars to sleepers, these are the guys that will help you achieve fantasy glory. This is the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast.
Welcome everybody to Season 4, Episode 31 of the PrimeTime Fantasy Football Podcast. We give you our predictions, our picks, with the hopes that we have you prevail throughout Week 8 and the rest of the 2024 fantasy football season. I'm your host, Nick Giacobbe. Joining me is Nick Cap. Nick, we're recording. It is very late Monday night. I think the two Monday Night Football games are still technically going on, but it is very late Monday night, Monday, October 21st. If you guys are watching this, I probably did not get the show uploaded in time for early morning, but it is up at some point on Tuesdays you're watching this. The NBA season kicks off, so Nick is rocking his Knicks hat in place of his Jets hat.
What Jets hat? I don't know what Jets hat you're talking about.
Yeah, maybe we'll talk some Jets on this fantasy football show. Maybe not.
We'll see. We'll have to see.
All right. Well, it is our Tuesday show. If this is your first time joining us on a weekly show, thank you so much. Maybe you watched our Week 7 live show on Sunday morning before the Jags and Patriots game. If you did that as well, thank you. We did tell a lot of you to play Tank Bigsby and Ramondre Stevenson. So, he gave you some good tips on that one, I think, at least. So, again, if it's your first time joining us, thank you so much. This is our Tuesday show that we're dropping. On our Tuesday shows, we give you Waiver Wire. We give you our top 5 takeaways from the week, 5 from Nick and 5 from me. So 10 fantasy football takeaways from the week. And then we're actually going to give you guys a last segment on the show. It's going to be a trade segment. One player you should trade for, and one player you should trade away. We're going to do this every single week for the next 3-4-ish weeks up until the trade deadline, just so you guys get a little extra content from us. And our waiver segment is going to be a little bit shorter today as the waiver wire gets smaller and smaller as the weeks do go on. So without further ado, this is the Primetime Fantasy Football Podcast. You can find us on YouTube and all audio streaming platforms. We're also available on all social media channels. So let's kick things off with the waiver wire for Week 8. And like I already stated, this is going to be a little bit of a shorter waiver wire because, again, Week 8, there's only so many waiver wire players you could actually talk about at this point, but that's okay. For quarterbacks, Nick, we have, first off, Drake May is owned in 13.3% of ESPN leagues. Their percentages are based off ESPN. We had to choose a platform for the season. That's what we've done. Tua Tagovailoa is owned in 25.6% of ESPN leagues. And Russell Wilson, who does not have a catchphrase so far this season, is only owned in 5.2% of ESPN leagues. Who are you looking to pick up, Nick?
I mean, I personally don't love any of these options. I think all three are going to be matchup based the rest of the season. If I did have to pick one that probably has the most upside, it is going to be Tua. Of the three, he doesn't have a great schedule, but we've seen this offense be elite. Russell Wilson, he put up a good fantasy day. I don't think he looked as good in the Jets game as his numbers really indicated. But that doesn't matter for fantasy. What matters is the numbers that you do put up. So good for him. But Tua, we've seen be near a top 10 quarterback. I believe he was just inside the top 10 last year, or just outside. So we know when that offense is rolling with Mike McDaniel and him, and he's got all those weapons still there, he's going to be the most playable. So I would be more comfortable picking up Tua and playing him as a spot start in flex spots versus a Drake May or a Russell Wilson.
I'm with Nick. I just don't know who needs a quarterback at this point, unless maybe your quarterbacks are Trevor Lawrence and Tua, and maybe you're in a 14, 16-man league or something. But we haven't really had any major quarterback injuries. We'll see what happens with Jaden Daniels. I know it's not major, but you might not have Jaden Daniels for this week, so you might need a spot start. But in terms of rest of season, I don't think you really need any of these guys. But I think it's worth, if you do need a backup, I think it's worth picking up any of these three. I'd lean Tua or Russ.
Mm-hmm.
We do not have any running backs this week. You can refer to the running backs we've given you the last 3 weeks, but at this point, it's really just backups. Nobody's breaking the glass ceiling anywhere. But we do have some receivers here. They are probably not available in your competitive leagues, but if they are available, you need to make sure you scoop them up this week. So first off, Juwan Jennings owned in 45.6% of ESPN leagues. I bet he's actually available in a lot of leagues. He was technically the wide receiver 3 for San Francisco. Also Kittle there. Also Mason there. He also had an injury this week. I think it was a hammy or something. So I think there's a good chance that Juwan Jennings is available in a lot of leagues, and he has to be rostered in 100% of leagues at this point with Brandon Ayuk out with the injury. And Debo also he was in the hospital today, apparently, with,
pneumonia,
after getting food poisoning and then pneumonia. So, and lastly, Romeo Dobbs owned in 37% of leagues. He's a back-to-back weeks of double-digit points. We gave him to you guys a couple weeks ago as one of our deep sleepers to go pick up. So we were kind of ahead of the curve on that one. And one more here of Keon Coleman owned in 44.4% of leagues, rookie on Buffalo. So Nick, I think you'll agree here that Juwan Jennings is probably your first choice, but they all need to be rostered in probably 70 to 80% of leagues after this week.
Yeah, I think all three of these guys definitely need to be on rosters. I agree. I'd go Juwan Jennings as my number one. We saw him earlier this year down one of the wide receiver weapons, although it was Debo and not Ayuk. We did see him go for like 46 fantasy points. I think he has the highest fantasy point total in any game this season.
I think so.
Maybe Jamar Chase beat him one of those weeks.
But Henry had a pretty big week too, but I don't think he had 40. I think he had 35.
Kamara had a big week. I don't know. We could I'll double check on that while Nick breaks it down too. But I like Juwan Jennings as the one, and then Romeo Dobbs would be my number two. I've said it pretty much every week on the podcast. When Dobbs has been out there, he has had the highest snap share of any of the Green Bay wide receivers. He has proven that when he is healthy and out on that field, he is a very good spot start. He has a fairly safe floor considering the lackluster wide receivers over there. So to me, I do think Romeo Dobbs is a safer option than we give him credit for.
Interesting here. We don't really need to harp on this too much. Lions wide receiver Jameson Williams is facing a 2-game suspension for violating the NFL's performance-enhancing substances policy. Interesting.
Who was that?
Jameson Williams got popped in the middle of the season.
Again, that's the second time.
Interesting. Only 2 games. I'm surprised it's not more on it. So even Josh Gordon was getting a year for just smoking weed. So
yeah.
All right. Our lone tight end that we've told you now for I think 2 or 3 weeks at this point to go pick him up, Hunter Henry, only owned in 27.4% of ESPN leagues. He is the tight end 5 on the season. I don't know how that number isn't higher, but if he's there, go get him for sure.
Yeah, I see we're losing Nick here. Nick's getting a little sleepy on us, and I get it. We're talking Patriots tight ends.
I haven't talked for a little bit. So, my vocal cords are warming up.
Yeah, we'll get into it. We'll get more hyped up when we get into our takeaways. But like Nick mentioned, we've been saying rookie quarterbacks love the tight end position. We haven't seen it as much from Nick's, but we've watched Zach Ertz have a few good games. We watched Cole Kmet have some dominant weeks, and now we're watching Hunter Henry get into his own. I feel like for the last 5-6 years, Derrick Henry has been like he's on the waiver wire, got to pick him up. Like he's always done it, and he still finds a way to be relevant for fantasy football. This is one of the better quarterback situations that he's had in his career. So I would definitely like to get a piece of Hunter Henry. Drake May has looked good in his first 2 starts. He has 5 total touchdowns. That is great to see from the young quarterback. So we'll see what we get from him, but I'm liking what I'm seeing from Drake May so far.
If you are a defensive streamer like me and Nick are, you're in luck because you should have a plethora of options come next week. So we have the Jets defense at the Patriots. We have the Packers defense at the Jags. The Lions defense, I believe they're home against the Titans. The Ravens defense is at the Browns. The Broncos defense is hosting the Panthers. The Chargers defense is hosting the Saints. And then the Bears defense is at the Commanders. I only threw that one in there if Jaden Daniels is out. If Daniels is playing, I don't want to play any defense against them. But I don't know who the Bears backup is. I'm not sure I want to know, but
it's Marcus Mariota.
The Commanders. The Commanders backup is Mariota. I don't want to see him against the Bears defense. So,
sure.
Nick, I gave you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 defenses. Why don't you give me your top 3? I guess 3 out of 7. We'll take the Bears out of there, considering I think Daniels is going to play, but he's going to be a later week decision.
Yeah, I think that this is going to be a big game for Rookie of the Year. So I do think he's going to try to bet his best to be out there. My number one.
They flex the Sunday Night Football, so the NFL is going to want him out there as well.
My number 1 and 2, you could switch them, I guess. It would be the Packers at the Jags and
I
the
like the
Lions
Packers one a lot.
hosting the Titans. The Jags and the Titans have been two of the most turnover worthy teams. The Packers forced a ton of turnovers. The Lions defense has been stellar this year. It was the weak point of their team last year. They dominated on offense. Now they play great complementary football. I think the Lions are, I mean, we know the Lions are legit, but they feel like the number one team in the NFC. They feel like they have a top 3 defense in the NFC. I like the Lions odds to absolutely crush them. And I like the Packers turning over the Jags in this game. If I had to pick a number 3, I know the Jets defense hasn't looked great, but the Patriots, again, flying back from London, that's kind of a tough one. And the Jets, the last time they played this team, 24-3. Different coaching staff, different quarterback from the matchup, but the Patriots just were not able to move the ball in the Jets. The game script was horrible for them, and they still weren't able to find the passing. Drake May did see some time in that game. So I don't love it. It's not my favorite one because the Jets defense has not looked as good the last 2 weeks. But I still do think that the talent out there, plus you get the addition of Hassan Reddick this week. So I'm sure he'll be jazzed up to try and get a sack or 2 in there.
Yeah, I mean, I've called the last 2 Jets games win or go home, and they've lost both apparently. So,
yeah.
All right, we are now going to move on to our top 5 takeaways from Week 7. I didn't change any of my takeaways. Nick had one of the same takeaways as me, but he also had 7 takeaways, so he was automatically going to have 5 different ones than me. So, that's okay. So,
Yep.
Nick, why don't you start with your first takeaway? And again, if you're a first-time listener or watcher on a weekly show like this, these 5 takeaways are not in any particular order. It's just however we want to kind of talk about them. So why don't you give me your first takeaway?
So the last few weeks I've been giving themes for the takeaways.
Nick does like themes. I don't do themes. I just do takeaways, but Nick does like themes.
Big fan of the theme this week. We're talking about veteran changes and impacts from these guys. So the first up we're going to talk about is Joe Mixon. Mixon is having one hell of a season when he's been out there. He has had 3 healthy games this season. Here are his finishes on the week in those 3 games. RB2, RB2, RB3. His lowest game this season when he's played the entire game, 26.4 points. That is an absolutely insane fantasy football stat line. And this also happened in a game where CJ Stroud played horrible. It was the worst game of his career, under 50% completion, 86 yards. I said on our Sunday Live, I thought the Packers were going to obliterate this team. They did obliterate CJ Stroud. They did not obliterate Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon had a field day against them on the ground. And that was really great. I mean, it was good to see him. And it's kind of fantastic. It's great for him, and it's great for fantasy for him to keep having these days. He's picked it up a lot more, the passing game workload. He's getting a handful of targets, but it's pacing out to be a pretty good season in that regard. So CJ Stroud, if he learns to check the ball down a little bit more, I think it's one of his bigger flaws. He tries to go vertical too much. He looks too hard at the second and third layer of the defense. He doesn't take enough underneath. I think if he could figure that part out of his game a little bit more, he doesn't want to play hero ball. We've seen that hinder some quarterbacks in their sophomore year. It's not uncommon to have a great rookie year and then try to have an even better sophomore year, and you just don't take the underneath stuff. Happens all the time. It's very normal. If they can slow that down and Joe Mixon starts getting more of a check down work, I mean, this guy's literally putting up Christian McCaffrey stat lines, like if that happens. So I'm very happy for him. I'm extremely excited. Happy he got off those pesky Bengals who wanted to cut him, if you remember, before the season for 2 bum running backs. But good to see Mixon in another good system, and good to see him working and being one of those veterans that's really impacting that team and your fantasy lineup.
Yeah, the thing that really sucks about Mixon for me is that I was all over him on the offseason. I think I was all over that. I mean, we could kind of probably clip some of those offseason shows. I love this ADP in rounds 4 or 5, especially if you're going 0 running back. I thought he was getting way underdrafted, and I got him nowhere. I drafted in 3 leagues, and it's not because I picked other guys over him. It's just kind of the way that the draft shook out for me. I never had the opportunity really to draft him where I was picking and stuff like that. And that's how it goes sometimes, but it just sucks to be so high on a guy. And you could argue, go get your guy around early. But, I drafted Kenneth Walker in a couple leagues, and my biggest bust was drafting Laporta, the Laporta party in 2 leagues. That was my biggest bust. So All right, my first one is going to be quick and easy, and it's just kind of, play your stars and don't really worry about it. And a lesson learned from me and Nick's all boom and all bust teams at times. Sometimes don't always bust the stars, especially in a matchup that's projected to be 50 points, across the board. So I busted both Jahmyr Gibbs and Aaron Jones. Both of them had tough matchups against good run defenses. Jahmyr Gibbs was the running back one on the week. He scored 28 fantasy points. Aaron Jones had 17 fantasy points, the running back 11 on the week. I mean, the bust, I was wrong. I probably didn't mean to bench them, but yes, they did not bust. But this is why you do always play your stars, especially at the running back position. And if you have confidence, in them. And I'll talk about some stars that have been busting. But yeah, if you do have confidence in your stars, especially in high scoring projected matchups, you probably should play them no matter what.
Sure.
All right. Your second takeaway.
So another veteran we're going to talk about, but Nick mentioned the running back, so I'm not going to ignore that first. Jahmyr Gibbs, but more importantly for this take, Jared Goff in this offense. This team is going crazy right now. This is one of the craziest stats I think I've heard in a long time for football. Jared Goff and the Detroit Lions have 18 touchdowns in the last 4 games. Jared Goff has 15 incompletions in the last 4 games. That is nuts that he's sustaining this type of passing volume and accuracy. I don't know if that's going to hold up over the course of the season, but it is a great trend to keep following and keep pounding Jared Goff in your starting lineup. And these Detroit Lions, there has been no slowing down for this team, and you got to love it. Also on the schedule, we noted it before the season, so let's renote it. They have 14 dome games this year. That's going to be tremendous for this offense. And I think Goff, I did get a notification since we started the podcast that Lamar Jackson is the new favorite for the MVP award over Patrick Mahomes. I think Jared Goff is going to have a real run at that award by the end of the season. I've also
I think you're right.
I've been screaming it too that I think Jordan Love has a good shot at it, especially on that pace. I think both these guys have a really good shot at it. And one more thing I want to mention, because I mentioned his name earlier, Nick just mentioned it. Jahmyr Gibbs, huge day. David Montgomery missed a tiny bit of time in this game, not too long. And Jahmyr Gibbs took advantage. RB1, top 15 running back in all of his games this season, over 12 points in every single game this season. RB7 on the year, already had the bye week. This is great. I mean, Gibbs is having a phenomenal season, and we kind of not disregarded it, but didn't give him the full amount of credit because Monty has been slightly better too than him. But after this week, Gibbs did jump into the top 10. Monty's sitting right outside the top 10, but both of them are pacing to be top 10 running backs this season, which is crazy. I don't remember if Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara did that together a few years ago in New Orleans, but this is kind of like that 1-2 punch tandem that you don't really see for fantasy football. And when you do see it, it's tremendous. Nick and I both love the Lions offense going into the year for fantasy football, and there's even more weapons than we expected. Jameson Williams has been great leading up to the suspension, and David Montgomery, who we both liked, but I don't think either of us really loved this year as much as we did last year. Right. So good for this Detroit Lions team.
I just had to look this up because I was thinking about it the other day. So the Lions right now to win the Super Bowl are a plus 800. They have the third highest odds behind the Chiefs and the Ravens. I wish I had kind of put that in a couple of weeks ago because they do look like the most dominant team in the NFC. And it does suck that they lost Hutchinson, but their biggest competition is probably the 49ers, who are kind of dropping like flies at the moment and will have some hangover. So that's a good bet right now. All right. What's the next one that I want to talk about? I have a couple here. Let's talk about Mr. Patrick Mahomes. You mentioned him in this MVP conversation. He's not an MVP. He's really not in fantasy football, not in NFL football, because he's sitting at the quarterback 22. You drafted him as probably a quarterback 3, 4, or 5, depending on your league, but he was a guy you drafted probably in the top 3, 4 rounds. He only has one game over 15 fantasy points at 15.4. So he's not notched a 20-plus point fantasy performance this year. His average is about 15, and again, the quarterback 22. And 15 is a fine-ish number, but not for the guy that you drafted within rounds 3 or 4 over a guy like Joe Mixon, who we just talked about. The other quarterbacks that were drafted right around Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, they're all in the top 8. Lamar, Allen, and Hurts are all within the top 5. I'm sorry, Hurts is in the top. Hurts is 8, and then Lamar and Allen are within the top 5. So I feel like I bust Mahomes every single year before the season, and I try to just scream to the heavens, why are we drafting Mahomes? Without Tyreek Hill, he hasn't been a top 5 fantasy quarterback. The first half of Mahomes' legacy was the offense, but the last 2 or 3 years have really been that defense, and that defense hasn't let up 28 NFL points in, I think, 2 years since the Eagles Super Bowl.
It's the Super Bowl against the Eagles.
So you're looking at, what was that, 17, 18? I mean, we're in week 7 now. You're looking at close to 25 games, 26 games. I think the number is 26.
More including the playoffs, yeah.
And Mahomes is still winning games. I'm not saying he's not valuable per se, but there's a reason LeBron James doesn't have 6 MVPs, and the reason is really ridiculous. Honestly, you should have 6 MVPs, but Mahomes is not going to be the best player this year. He's not going to win the MVP. He'll probably still win the Super Bowl or go to the Super Bowl. But in fantasy football, it's time to start overvaluing Mahomes based on his name. And I think next year is the year that people really need to see a drop-off on this guy, because unless they trade for or draft a really stud receiver, I just don't see why he's being drafted as a top 3-4 guy across the board in smart leagues. I'm not talking about casual leagues, so it's smart leagues. I don't know why you draft him. So
I was thinking about that earlier. Like, where would we put Mahomes' ADP next year, especially if he wins another Super Bowl? Because I feel like if he did not win the Super Bowl, let's say he lost to Lamar in the AFC Championship this past season, like, Mahomes probably isn't the 3rd drafted quarterback. It would have been Lamar. Lamar was the 4th this year. But are we putting him under Stroud? I don't think we would have, because we would have said, well, he got Rashee Rice in this year. We got Hollywood Brown in. He has Xavier Worthy, the new speedster. So I don't know if how much our ADP adjustment's going to be for him. Although I do agree with you. Like, Nick and I have both been anti-drafting Mahomes. And this year has not done him any service. I saw a good comparison today. It's almost like if LeBron James was Patrick Mahomes in this situation for basketball, be like him averaging 13, 5, and 5 in the prime of his career, but hitting a buzzer beater in just about every single game to win the game. Like, that's exactly what's going on. He's just delivering in big moments, which is great for football. It's not great for fantasy football. And I'll swing it right.
But he's not really delivering. I mean, to cut you off, but he's not really delivering in big moments either. He hasn't really had to. I mean, like, even that Bengals game, they should have lost that one. He didn't really drive them down the field. They got bailed out with a penalty, and Burrow had that ridiculous fumble. So it's like Mahomes hasn't even had the opportunity to really, like, show out because he hasn't needed to. The defense is keeping them within games. So I don't know.
That's fair.
I think the adjustment that needs to be needed is a lot of quarterbacks need to get dropped in terms of their ADP, and the quarterbacks need to have a chain reaction going in around 6 to 8 rather than 3 to 5.
Well, I think if we're readjusting, if I can imagine next year, the ADP it'll still be Josh, and then I think it'll probably be Jaden Daniels number 2.
Probably.
Maybe we'll probably get Jalen Hurts and Lamar. That should be the top 4 next year.
Those should be the 4, yep.
And then I just don't know who would comfortably be the 5. I feel like there's a reason not to take every quarterback. And that
Love is playing out of his mind. Love is
but it's going to be the same, pocket passing quarterback. It's similar to It's not Mahomes, but the scheme is similar just as much. If Josh Jacobs didn't have 1 touchdown this year and had 5, Jordan Love would have the same issue.
Right.
So I don't know. We'll see when I get there.
Yep.
But I'll take it into my takeaway because I'm also talking the Chiefs. But I said veterans, and I'm focused on one man, and it's Kareem Hunt. This is why people hate the Kansas City Chiefs. 5 years removed from this team, literally sitting on a couch before the season, wasn't good enough to be the Browns running back, which he was the running back for last year. After Nick Chubb got hurt, they chose not to bring him in this year. And he's having a hell of a year with the Kansas City Chiefs, or a hell of a past couple games. He came in, dropped 22.3 on a tough 49ers defense. And the week before, he had 22 carries. These past 2 games, he's had 22 carries, 27 carries, 3 total touchdowns, and 210 all-purpose yards. And it's so annoying. And this is why I'm a Jets fan. I'm very frustrated with the Jets. But it's mind-boggling to me how 31 teams in the NFL add a player at some point, or a player that you think, oh, he's past his prime, won't be as good, and then turns out not to be nearly as good. Just referencing the Jets, I think about Dalvin Cook and Le'Veon Bell, two guys that were literally 1,000-yard rushers and very, very good players at the tail end of their prime and just fall off a cliff. Kareem Hunt comes back, and he's been a top 5 running back to back weeks for him. He had a bye in between, but it's insane. And it's not just him. We watched McCole Hardman be relevant for this team. Kadarius Toney, Juju, MVS. They've just Hunt's been the most consistent, but all these guys have been good. So,
oh no, he's
what?
Out.
What happened?
I need 6 points from Baker Mayfield, and
I
there's like 2 minutes left, and the guy just had 1 foot in bounds, and I almost got very excited.
Oh, I need the opposite from Baker. I need less than 8 points from Baker to win my matchup. Anyway, we'll keep it moving. But all I want to add as a piece of this, there is 2 wide receivers that I think the Kansas City Chiefs are going to make a move for, one or the other. Number 1, Elijah Moore. It feels so right. He is a talented player, not superstar electric, is not worth the draft compensation of a star receiver like the Amari Cooper, Devontae Adams would have demanded, but can be used behind the line of scrimmage in motion, can be very solid as a receiver. Now, Nick's got me checking the game in the corner of my eye. He can be good, but he cannot be a superstar. So that feels like a guy Kansas City would go after. The other one is Christian Kirk, who I think will command a little bit more trade value for sure. But there's no way the 2-5 Jacksonville Jaguars, maybe going to be 2-6 after this week, are going to want to keep him after they just paid Gabe Davis and they know they're going to have to pay Brian Thomas Jr. That's a long way down the road, but it's definitely in the mirror at least. Nick's really got me scared now about my matchup because I have 99% chance of winning this matchup since before.
I think Baker just scored, but my points haven't updated yet on Sleeper. So we're literally like 2 minutes left on the game, and I thought I was dead.
Oh my God, he did score. He has 26.24.
In garbage time. So I'm gonna flash my matchup on the screen right now. Oh no, my matchup it still didn't update. It was updated.
My opponent has a not safe for work name as his team, so I will not flash it up. But the score is 138.6 to me, 135.5 to him with Baker.
Mine I can flash up. I'm the Rats. I'm at 118 and he's at 115.
So you just took the win.
I hope so. I mean, as long as nothing else crazy happens. Okay. This is why fantasy football is ridiculous, because that's all garbage time, really.
Yeah.
It was all garbage time. I apologize. I missed my co-host's entire take. And this is partly because of our unbiased friend here who had texted in the group chat that he was going to lose to Baker in garbage time. Because again, I thought I was dead in the water. Anyway, my third take. Let's talk about Drake London. And I don't know where we really stood on Drake London. I don't remember, for being particularly honest with you. I don't think either of us got him in any league.
No, I think so. Here's where I think me and you stood on London. We really liked him. We just thought he was being drafted at his ceiling and didn't think there was enough value because he was being drafted in the middle to the end of the second round. Both of us said we liked him. We just didn't love him at his ADP. We felt like running back was a better pivot in that later second, early third round.
I think so. And he's actually not just achieving his ADP, but he's smashing his ADP. He was drafted, I put here that he was drafted as wide receiver 8 to 12, roughly. And through 7 weeks, he's the wide receiver 3 on the season with a 17.9 average. And his average is wide receiver 9 on the season, but that's okay. Hasn't had his bye week yet, and this is before the Monday Night Football games. He had one stinker. It was week 1, where again, Kirk's coming off the injury, facing a tough, stingy Steelers defense, and week 1 doesn't matter. Since week 2, he has double digits in each game. He has 17-plus fantasy points in 5 out of 6 games. He's the wide receiver 2 in total points and the wide receiver 8. In terms of average, he's locked and loaded in your lineups. Like, you have to have confidence in playing him every week. If he throws up a stinker this week, that's okay. I would still have super duper confidence in him rest of the season because of the way that he has played. Consistency, like I said, double digits in 5 out of 6 games. And then 17 plus in 5 out of 6 games. Like, that's complete consistency. That's a guy that you could trust week in and week out. And if you're facing Drake London, he's a guy you now need to be scared of to play. So,
yeah.
All right. Take number 4 for you.
So
that's just pretty cool. That's pretty cool. We got a live matchup dependent swing here. I don't think it's happened before on the shows.
I don't think so, because we haven't really recorded during any of the games, but
no, we don't.
My matchup is still 138 to 135. I also realize I have James Conner. He has Cameron Dicker, who has 13 points already in this game, and they are in field goal range at the moment. So that is not good.
So we're not sure if Baker actually cost you the matchup yet. You won't know until...
No. It will be after the podcast I find out that I lost the fantasy football matchup that I probably shouldn't have. Anyways, let's get into takeaway number 4. I got to talk about my least favorite team in football, the Cleveland Browns, and this new reformed offense. So last week, what was this offense looking like? Deshaun Watson, Amari Cooper, Jerome Ford. Now looks like it's a little bit better for fantasy football. DTR, hopefully not. He is injured. We do not root for injuries for that Browns quarterback and Jameis Winston, who we would love to be the starting quarterback for fantasy football. Then you have Jerry Jeudy as the wide receiver 1, we assume, presumably over there. David Njoku and Nick Chubb. Chubb in his limited workload, only 36% snap share. Not too bad. I thought he didn't look awful on the field. He definitely looked like he's recovering, but 36% snap share. We'll see that go up.
He scored, right?
I'm sorry?
I think he scored. Didn't he score?
I don't remember.
I think he did score. It may have been called back, but I think he scored.
Okay. Oh, maybe. Okay. And then these next 2 weeks, they're not great. But then he gets the bye week, and the schedule gets really, really easy after that. And let's take a look at the rest of this offense. Cedric Tillman, to be honest, did not really know who Cedric Tillman was before this game. Wide receiver 4 for the Browns. Well, leads the team in targets without him. 12 targets. Then you get Elijah Moore, 7 targets. Jerry Jeudy, 5. Jerry Jeudy gets the leading snap share, as he tends to do for this team. Pretty great. But here's the big news of the team. David Njoku. Last year, he was the tight end 1 rest of season after the Deshaun Watson injury with Joe Flacco. Now Deshaun gets hurt, and what does David Njoku do? And I'll be honest, David Njoku was on the all-bust team, but we didn't know we were getting better quarterback play. 10 catches, 76 yards, and a touchdown. Tight end 1 on the week so far. Easiest rest of season schedule at the tight end position, very favorable. We did not talk about him on the waiver wire segment, but I did see him dropped in a ton of leagues because he's been injured and he hasn't been great when he's been out there. If he is available in your league, he is the tight end I would rather add over Hunter Henry.
I don't blame you for that one. Yeah, I hope we get a guy Jameis in there. I can't believe that Jameis didn't get enough snaps. That was very disappointing.
Yeah,
I want some Jabu in there. Okay. Let's talk about another offense here that's been very bad, and it's the Dolphins offense. And I'm ready to plant my flag in the ground here. The Dolphins star players are not playable without Tua Tagovailoa in the offense. So here are your stats here. Weeks 1 to 2, the Dolphins offense. Devon Achane was your running back 2, averaging 26.3 fantasy points. Tyreek Hill, weeks 1 to 2. And again, Tua got injured halfway through week 2 in a tough matchup against the Bills. Tyreek Hill was your wide receiver 17, an average of 16.3. Jalen Waddle, weeks 1 to 2, is your wide receiver 28, average of 12.4. Now we're going to go weeks 3 to 7 without Tua Tagovailoa. They also had the bye, but you're still looking at 4 weeks here. Devon Achane went from the running back 2 to the running back 52. He went from 26.3 to 7 at the running back 52. His highest game was only 10.5 fantasy points. He only scored double digits once. Tyreek Hill went from your wide receiver 17 to wide receiver 67. His average dipped from 16.3 to 7.6. He's wide receiver 65. Highest game was only 12.9, only game over double-digit fantasy points. Jalen Waddle dipped from wide receiver 28 to wide receiver 78 with a 6.2 average at wide receiver 79. Highest game of the season was only 8.6. So, with that said, take the names out of it. None of those players have been playable without Tua. We think Tua's returning this next week, but if he gets hurt again, whether it's this year or next year, honestly, None of these guys are playable without Tua Tagovailoa, and that's just the reality of the situation. The Dolphins, my co-host noted this to me earlier. The Dolphins have a very, very tough strength of schedule. If you look at the defenses that they're playing, I think they still have one more against the Bills, two more against the Jets.
I think they have the Jets championship week or second to last week.
A couple other really, really tough matchups. So
Kansas City, Baltimore.
So we'll talk about it in our trade segment. I don't think we have Dolphins, but you might want to consider shipping out your Dolphins, especially if they have a good game this week. They won't have value until Tua plays, but if Tua plays well and they play well, that might be a good opportunity to ship them out. All right, Nick, take number 5, final take from week 7.
So as Nick mentioned, I had 7 takes before. I had to cut one of them because Nick was.
If you want to give both of them, I'm not going to stop.
No, it's okay. I'm going to stick with the one, and I chose to be a man and talk about the things that we need to talk about in our community. We have to talk about that AFC East team that traded for a wide receiver, the Buffalo Bills, and Amari Cooper, and this new reformed offense. Josh Allen looked great. Most passing yards he had in any game this season. Top defense, and it was against one of the top defenses for the quarterback position. Josh Allen this year, 14 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. Pretty phenomenal. All 3 Bills wide receivers have great games. Amari Cooper, 16.6. Keon Coleman, 16.5. Khalil Shakir, 13.5. Here's the advantage to Amari Cooper, and he is not who I'm talking about in our trade for segment, but something you need to take note of. Amari Cooper, only 35% snap share in his debut game, got 5 targets on that little bit of workload. Expect the rest of the season to be fantastic. Keon Coleman, best game of the year. Love him rest of season, and love that the field looked a lot more open for him again against a very tough defense in the Tennessee Titans, who were a top 2 team to the wide receiver position. Now, Khalil Shakir, he was the target leader on the team this week. He got his consistency so far. I don't think all 3 of these guys can be sustainable week to week. I think Amari Cooper is the clear one. I think Shakir is probably going to take the biggest hit being outside of the slot once Amari Cooper really gets in there a lot more. So that would be my concern. I did talk about Jared Goff and Jordan Love winning the MVP this year, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say, well, Josh Allen lost a lot more pieces going into this season and is going into it full head of steam. 14-0 touchdown interception ratio. Turnovers have been a big problem for him in his career. He also gets a late game or a later game in the season against Kansas City. They've historically been really good against Kansas City in the regular season. If he manages to knock the undefeated Chiefs off at that point, I think Josh Allen, as well as Jordan Love and Jared Goff, all 3 of them have a very good shot to win the MVP award. But Josh Allen, to me, should be the leader in the clubhouse.
I do want to note here, Chris Godwin just got hurt with a minute left. They're down 10 points. I'm trying to figure out on Twitter what's happening because I did see the play and that did not.
I do also need to report on my game now. I am losing 140.3 to 140 on the dot. So I'm down 0.3. I still have James Conner. He still has Baker and Cameron Dicker at 17 fantasy points at the moment. I hate kickers for fantasy.
Nick does hate
and
kickers.
I am seeing Chris Godwin is getting carted off the field with 43 seconds left in the game. That is not good for a top 2 or 3 receiver in fantasy football at the moment.
My dynasty team is now down 3 receivers. Great. All right. Final takeaway. The Packers defense is very, very good against quarterbacks, and it's time to start talking about it. They've only allowed 2 quarterbacks to notch in the top 10 within certain weeks, and those finishes, I believe, were 9 and 10. I do have them here. 4 out of 7 of the performances were bottom 20 performances. So I'll read them off to you. Jalen Hurts, quarterback 10 with 18.4 points. Anthony Richardson, quarterback 21 with 12.9. Will Levis, quarterback 18 with 15.6. Sam Darnold, quarterback 9 with 21.5. Matt Stafford, quarterback 22, 13.4. Kyler Murray, quarterback 25 with 12. Then CJ Stroud, quarterback 25, 5.3. That was a low. It's the only game he was under 10 fantasy points. So they notched a ton of turnovers. A couple of those weeks they were without their top 2 corners and a couple other key pieces. Yeah. So the Packers defense is legit. I'd be scared to play quarterbacks against the Packers defense at this point. And if you have the Packers defense, I'd really consider, holding on to them and not dropping them. They will have some tougher matchups against, they haven't played the Lions yet. They'll play the Vikings again. But those Caleb Williams matchups, they're going to eat him alive. And there's going to be a couple other really, really good ones, throughout the season. So,
yeah.
All right. God, that just deflated my entire night. My entire night is deflated. That was my chance. All right. We're now going to go to trade bait here. We're going to give you one player to trade for and one player to trade away before we get out of here. So, Nick, who is your trade for candidate?
You said we weren't going to talk about Dolphins, but I am. I stood on my flag before the season. I said it after week 1. I think Devon Achane is going to explode. I said it before the year, and it got hindered by the Tua injury. So let's talk about it. Tua looks like he's returning next week, which is great for the Miami Dolphins and their fantasy football outlooks. Tua returning from this injury, great for Achane. Achane the first 2 weeks of the season with Tua, 23 points, 29.5 points, RB2, RB3 on the week, 14 combined catches. Achane, 60% snap share in those games. This week, we were concerned Mostert before the year would interfere with those touches. Well, Devon Achane got his highest snap share since week 1 with Mostert healthy for the first time with 2 of them back out on the field. Higher than the week 1 where they both played together. That is great for him. And people think Achane can be a top 12 running back rest of the season with Tua. Nick and I both think the Dolphins will be better, although the schedule is tough. I think he's going to be a top 5, top 3 running back rest of the season. I said it before the year that I thought he'd finish in the top 5. I said after week 1, if I were redrafting, it would have been Saquon and Achane as my 1 and 2. I'm standing on my flag. I will die on this hill that I think Devon Achane is a superstar running back and is going to continue to prove it this year.
All right. I'm going to go with who I've been saying for the past week. So I'm just going to take my take that I've had for the past week. That is Mr. Consistent Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard has played 7 games this season. Or actually, no, he's actually played 6 games this season. But in 5 out of 6 games, he has over 15 fantasy points. He's one stinker against the Jets at 5.9 fantasy points, and that's okay. But that doesn't worry me a ton. Tough defense against the Jets. But here's what really intrigues me about Tony Pollard, and it's his playoff schedule. So his playoff schedule is going to be hosting the Bengals, at the Colts, and then at the Jaguars. Those are 3 just big money matchups. He should probably produce really, really good fantasy points. Other matchups, if you need to get in the playoffs, there's 2 matchups before the playoffs. He's at the Commanders and hosting the Jaguars. So I think Tony Pollard not only is going to get you in the playoffs if you need a playoff push towards the end of your season, but then he's going to win you a fantasy football championship. He does have some tough matchups in between, though. He has the Lions next week, which is a nightmare matchup. He's going to have the Vikings, which is a tough matchup. He's going to have the Chargers. So he will have some tough matchups in there. But that's why Tony Pollard's a good trade for candidate. And I actually wouldn't do it at the time when you're listening to the show. I'd probably let him go play the Lions and get a really bad number this week, and then make an offer to the Tony Pollard owner and try to get him after the Lions matchup. At least that's what I plan on doing in my leagues, because I think he is going to be a bust this week. But I think Pollard is going to help win fantasy football championships. I do love the consistency. He's done it against other tough defenses. Super duper talented. They really run that offense through him, and I just don't see that changing.
Okay. All right. So trade away candidate. I am going with King Henry. And I know you're all watching him have a fantastic fantasy day. Top 10 running back each of the last 5 weeks. Been fantastic. I don't think that's going to happen for the rest of the season. To me, the problem has really been the schedule for this team, or will be the schedule. The defenses they've played so far, super easy. Vegas, Dallas, Buffalo, Cincinnati, Washington, Tampa Bay. Teams he is taking absolute advantage of. Here's what their schedule looks like for the rest of the year. They have Pittsburgh twice, Philly, Chargers, Houston. These are all top 8 teams against running backs. Derrick Henry is matchup proof, do not get me wrong, but these are definitely going to limit his usage and his upside. It is not going to look much better than that. Here's what I will say. that I really do not like for Derrick Henry. Championship week this year, he's going up against the Houston Texans. Nick, if you remember from last season, I was praising the idea of the Houston Texans being the matchup for Derrick Henry in the playoffs. Well, it's not the same case this year. Last year, he got to play the Houston Texans twice in the playoffs. Historically, Derrick Henry had dominated this team. In the last 5 matchups to them, he had over 1,000 all-purpose yards and 2 touchdowns. That's 200 yards and 2 touchdowns per game against this team. Last year, in his 2 games against the Houston Texans, a total of 28 carries for 51 yards. It was a horrendous performance. And I'd say all that to tell you this. I don't think Derrick Henry is going to be a bust. I don't think he's going to be horrible the rest of the season. I think he's going to be a top 12 running back. The problem is, I think you could get Devon Achane, Joe Mixon, Christian McCaffrey if he's healthy, Bijan Robinson, Kenneth Walker, and a top receiver and tight end at the value Derrick Henry commands right now. So all I'm saying is I think Devon Achane will be at that level. Joe Mixon will be at that level. Christian McCaffrey, if he's healthy, will be at that level. Bijan, pretty much or not above that level. And Kenneth Walker has been at that level. Plus another starter for your fantasy football lineup. So not saying Derrick Henry is going to be bad, just saying the value is so immense right now. Why would you not sell high if you do not think he's going to finish as dominant? Again, the last 6 weeks now, he's been a top 10 running back each and every one of those weeks. He might finish that pace, but he's not going to maintain that. No running back in history outside of Christian McCaffrey has maintained that pace. He does not get enough workload in the passing game to maintain it.
I'm going to go with running back 5 on the season, Chuba Hubbard. And he's great these last 4 weeks. 4 or 5 consecutive weeks over 15 fantasy points at this point. Running back 5 on the season at the time of the recording. However, Jonathan Brooks is still looming, and I think the Panthers are going to want to get him on the field to see what that rookie can do. The Panthers also aren't going to compete down the stretch, so why would they keep running Chuba Hubbard out there? I am worried about the Brooks thing. Panthers also have some tough matchups coming up. We have the Broncos here, the Giants. They're going to have the Bucks twice, Kansas City. There's going to be tough matchups. So, and they don't have Atlanta again. Their Atlanta matchup is going to be after the playoffs. So they've now only scored 10 or less points in 2 out of their last 3 matchups. This one against the Commanders, and the Commanders have had a bad defense for the majority of the season. So I don't have a lot of confidence in this Panthers offense. And I think Chuba Hubbard does command a bit of trade value at this point, knowing that he's the running back 5. I think this is the time to get out. Kind of like Nick said, you could probably trade for another flex guy, whether it's a receiver, whether it's another running back, like a Joe Mixon, like a Tony Pollard. You can even do an even swap at that point and probably go get a better guy by trading Chuba Hubbard to the owner of Jonathan Brooks so that they could kind of roster the Panthers starter. But that's the move that I would kind of make. Swapping one running back for another, I think is really solid. So that is our show, or first show, I should say, for heading into week 8. Hopefully you enjoyed this one. If you're watching live, or not live, I should say, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you drop a like on this video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell icon so you get notifications every time we go live. If you're listening on an audio streaming platform, please give us a 5-star rating and a review. You can also find us on social media. Instagram is PrimeTime Fantasy Football Podcast, and Twitter is PrimeTime FF Pod. If you have any questions throughout the week. Thank you guys for listening and supporting. Make sure to set those waiver wires by 3 a.m. Wednesday morning, and we'll talk to you guys on Friday.